The judge laughed at an 81-year-old veteran, calling him a coward seconds later. One call sign made the entire courtroom rise to its feet. The courtroom air was heavy, filled with whispers and impatient glances. At the center of it all stood an 81-year-old man, frail in body, but with eyes that carried lifetimes of untold stories. He wore a faded jacket, its fabric worn but adorned with pins of forgotten valor. Instead of respect, the judge sneered at him, dismissing his presence with a cold laugh. The word coward spilled from the bench, cutting through the silence like a blade. People shifted uncomfortably, their judgments quick and shallow. But the old man, Samuel, slowly raised his head. And then, with a whisper of a single call sign, he transformed the room forever. Before we continue this story, go ahead and subscribe to our channel and like this video so we can bring you even more amazing stories like this one. Samuel Hayes was not just another senior citizen struggling in his twilight years. He was a man who had once carried nations on his shoulders. At 81 years old, his body bore the visible frailty of time, a slow gait, trembling hands, and a voice that sometimes cracked under its own weight. But behind his quiet demeanor lay a past of courage, written in sweat, scars, and sacrifice. Decades earlier, Samuel had served with distinction in one of the most brutal conflicts of the century. His service, though long forgotten by the younger generation, had once earned him medals that gleamed with honor. But medals don't pay bills, and honor doesn't shield one from hardship. Life after the military had been unkind. His wife had passed years ago, his children scattered across distant states, busy with their own lives. Samuel was left to fight his battles alone, this time not with weapons, but with poverty, illness, and indifference. That day in court, he was fighting to keep his small, aging home from being taken. The bank had given no mercy, and now he stood before a judge who seemed equally unmoved. The courtroom was crowded, some drawn by routine duty, others by morbid curiosity. Few saw Samuel as anything more than an old man clinging desperately to what little remained. The judge, stern and impatient, viewed Samuel with disdain. To him, the veteran's stories were excuses, his struggles a sign of weakness. When Samuel tried to explain his hardships, the judge cut him short with a mocking chuckle. "You're 81 years old and still looking for pity," he said coldly. "A man like you is nothing but a coward." The word echoed cruel and deliberate. Samuel bowed his head, not from shame, but from remembering a night when cowardice had never been an option. The judge's words struck Samuel harder than any bullet he had ever faced. Coward. It was a label he had never been given, not in his youth, not in the prime of his service, not even in the darkest hours of war. For a man who had stared death in the face and kept marching forward, the insult was more than unjust. It was blasphemous. Memories began to surge, unbidden but vivid. Samuel could still feel the oppressive heat of the jungle, the acrid smoke of gunfire, the desperate cries of his comrades. At just 21, he had been thrust into a battlefield where survival seemed impossible. Yet, through sheer willpower and loyalty, he had risen above fear, guiding his unit through ambushes, starvation, and nights when the only light came from flares bursting in the sky. One mission stood out among the rest, a mission that had defined him, though the world would never know. His platoon had been surrounded, outnumbered 5-1. Supplies were gone, reinforcements were miles away, and surrender would have meant certain death. As panic spread, Samuel had remembered the one phrase that bound them together, their call sign. Whispered into the radio, it was both a command and a promise. It meant we fight, we survive, we leave no one behind. And survive they did. That call sign was etched into the souls of the men who lived, because Samuel refused to bow to fear. For decades he carried that memory, though he never spoke of it. The mission was classified, buried in files locked away from public view, but to those who were there, it was unforgettable. Now, in this courtroom, Samuel stood at another kind of battlefield, not one of bullets and bombs, but of dignity and truth. Around him, whispers grew. Some smirked at the judge's insult, others looked at Samuel with pity, but none understood. His frail body trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of years. Slowly he lifted his head. His voice cracked at first, barely above a whisper, but then steadied with the authority of a man who had once commanded life and death. He spoke a single word, a call sign. The effect was immediate. A veteran seated quietly in the back froze, his eyes widening in recognition. A murmur rippled across the room, as others who had served shifted uncomfortably, some even standing to attention without realizing it. The call sign wasn't just a word, it was history. It was survival. It was sacrifice. The judge's smirk faltered. For the first time, doubt flickered in his eyes. He had mocked an 81-year-old man, but now he was realizing that before him stood not a coward, but a survivor of a legacy greater than his courtroom. The silence that followed Samuel's whisper was louder than any gavel strike. The judge, once smug and dismissive, looked unsettled. His mocking demeanor evaporated as the weight of the call sign sank into the air. He glanced nervously around the courtroom, suddenly aware that the room had shifted against him. The retired officer in the gallery finally broke the silence. Standing tall despite his age, his voice trembled with reverence. That call sign, it belongs to the mission that saved an entire battalion. It's written in the blood of men who would never have seen home if not for him. Gasps spread through the courtroom. Those who moments before had looked down on Samuel now stared at him with awe. People leaned in, whispering, their eyes wide with respect. Even the bailiff, a young man in uniform, straightened his posture as though silently saluting. The judge tried to regain control, but his words faltered. He had called Samuel a coward in front of witnesses, only to be confronted with undeniable proof of courage greater than he could comprehend. His gavel remained untouched, his authority suddenly meaningless against the truth of history. Samuel didn't gloat. He didn't smirk or raise his voice. He simply stood with quiet dignity, the weight of his years balanced by the strength of his past. He had not spoken the call sign for glory, but for truth, for every man who never made it home, for every sacrifice that still lingered in his heart. The courtroom had changed. Samuel was no longer the fragile 81-year-old struggling to keep his house. He was a living reminder of courage, endurance, and sacrifice. And for the first time, even the judge bowed his head in insolence. The case that had begun as a routine foreclosure hearing became something far greater. Samuel's quiet revelation had shifted the ground beneath the courtroom, forcing everyone present to confront the weight of their assumptions. The judge, chastened and speechless, adjourned the case, unable to proceed with his usual arrogance. News of the incident spread quickly beyond the courtroom walls. Local veterans groups rallied around Samuel, ensuring that he would not fight his battles alone anymore. Neighbors who had once dismissed him as frail or irrelevant began to see him in a different light. His story reminded them that behind every elderly face lay decades of battles, sacrifices, and triumphs invisible to the casual eye. For Samuel, the moment was not about vindication, but about dignity. At 81 years old, he had carried his memories in silence for too long. That day, when forced to confront the cruelest insult, he chose not to defend himself with anger, but with truth. A single call sign spoke louder than any argument. It told the world, courage is not bound by age, and sacrifice does not fade with time. The judge, though shamed, became a symbol too, a reminder of how easily society forgets its heroes, how quick it is to dismiss the old, the frail, the quiet, and in that forgetting lies a dangerous injustice. As Samuel left the courtroom, supported by fellow veterans who now stood proudly at his side, he did not look back. His legacy was not in the judge's words, nor in the courtroom whispers. It was in the lives he had saved, the men who had once followed him into fire, and the truth that still echoed through history. So the next time you see an old man walking slowly with a cane, ask yourself, is he just old, or is he someone who once carried the weight of a nation? Because heroes don't always wear uniforms. Sometimes they wear time itself.